And yes, we're talking about Grand Theft Auto today. GTA is an action-adventure sandbox game, just in case for some strange reason you've never played it before. But with all great things, everyone starts at the bottom, and for the makers of Grand Theft Auto, this was no different. We have to go back to the year 1995 in Dundee, Scotland, through a company called DMA Design. Originally dubbed Race and Chase, this would be the working title for the very first Grand Theft Auto game. It resembled nothing like the games we know today, a top-down 2D driving game. Pretty basic in comparison to the wide-open sandbox game in the series that we all know and love. MBG Interactive, the publisher for the game, actually originally wanted to can the idea due to the fact that the game fundamentally didn't work. Yeah, that's a pretty big problem. The game was apparently just one complete massive mess for many years, and at many points the publisher even wanted to scrap the game, basically saying that it just didn't work, and what was the point in spending all those man hours making a game that barely worked in the first place. In October 1997, they released the very first Grand Theft Auto game. After having renamed it into the title we all know, it was mid. It was alright. I mean, it was nothing to write home about. Look, it wasn't the mega Goliath title that we all know today. It was, still in its infancy, still trying to find its feet, still trying to find the best car to rob to make the game interesting. And there lies some of the real key problems with this game. However, there was two things more than anything which made the game, okay, but could have been much better. Perhaps some of the real big issues with the game held it back from being a cult classic, but primarily the two things that held it back was first and foremost the game's stability. So even if you did get something in the game, you couldn't really test it. The other big problem was the handling of the vehicles in the game, and for a game which you pretty much exclusively drive around in cars, this was a big problem. Therefore, the fundamental core of the game was broken. Yeah, I mean, what use is your driving game if the driving controls of your driving game are fundamentally janky and broken? I mean, who's going to play that for more than 5 minutes? I mean, look, if you break down the basic premise of the game and what you're doing, you're basically evading the law, stealing cars, and basically driving around like a criminal. The idea of the game is fun, but the actual gameplay leaves a lot to be desired. The developers knew that their game was fun, but was just obscure enough for people not to give it the time of day that it deserved. Therefore, they decided to do the ingenious move by really laying thick onto the legal issues that potentially surround this game and the nature of the game itself, and completely brought it into the spotlight to feature this game. Violent and dangerous video games? Hell yeah, brother. The studio hired a marketing director and publicist named Max Clifford. This guy is something else. This guy built his career on spinning bullshit and making up stories to propel the career of his clients. Just to give you an idea of what this guy did in the past and why he has been chosen for this type of job, his work would be primarily focused against flaring hate against his clients or what they were doing, basically by publishing completely fabricated stories to the press in order to rile up public opinion, and that was the way that he propelled his client's career to the next level. Just as one example, musician Freddie Starr had a newspaper article made about him which claimed that he ate somebody's hamster. The tabloid newspaper The Sun ran with the story, publishing it with the now iconic headline, "Freddie Starr ate my hamster." I love how they could have picked absolutely anything to rile up public opinion about Freddie Starr, but they decided that, they didn't want to go too far, but also far enough in order to make people feel, I don't even know what I'm saying. This guy ate a bloody hamster, apparently. But he didn't. It was all completely fabricated. This story was completely false, but that didn't stop people from reporting about it everywhere, it becoming headline news. People were talking about Freddie Starr, and that is exactly what he wanted to happen. You might be wondering why on earth this happened, and the story is a ridiculous one to sell, but even negative press is good news. After this was released, his tour would soon sell out afterwards. Despite how you feel about it, this type of marketing does work, provided it's done correctly. Which is why you see newspapers peddling these types of stories all the time to try and sensationalize the most random and obscure stories you've ever seen, selling many newspapers, or, in more modern days, getting those clicks. And this is pretty much the exact same tactic that Grand Theft Auto is going to adopt. If they had a game that was potentially controversial on their hands, why not stick a firework up its arse and make it explode for the public to see? I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Either it all goes horribly wrong and they get everybody on them, or the alternative is if they don't do it, the game would likely fade into obscurity and we would never have the Grand Theft Auto games that we all know and love today. So, they took a big gamble. So, anyway, Max Clifford, he ran a story with the tabloid newspapers and just poked enough people and publicists to start a domino effect whereby the tabloid newspapers sensationalised the content in the game. The public outcry came as a result, and then the political sphere started getting involved to add fuel to the fire. Anything to make this game a hit with the headlines. Soon enough, everybody would know what Grand Theft Auto was. One of the first newspapers to take the bait was, of course, the bloody Daily Mail, because of course it was. They made the very real headline, which simply said, "Criminal computer game that glorifies hit-and-run thugs." Of course, the article made wild accusations about the content in the game, which I won't repeat here, but just know that they were quite outlandish. The House of Lords in the UK, a few weeks before the game was released, even had a debate about the content of the game and how children may potentially get their hands on the dirty game that is GTA. This was enough to fuel the hype train. As the future titles came out, this rhetoric would pretty much come up again and again and again. A new fresh wave of criticism from mainly right-wing publications, which as a result brought about a fresh wave of people discovering the game. As underhanded as this marketing strategy is, by God it bloody well worked. Many people have tried to mimic this sort of thing in the future and try and play on these sensationalised tabloid papers to try and get a story out there. Some have been more successful than others. One example in particular that didn't go quite so well was when the creators of Burnout decided to try and release a newspaper article in the UK which basically said that if you break the speed limit, then the makers of Burnout 2 will cover your bill. As you might expect, this didn't go down well. So yes, that was how GTA got its start. They were propelled into the limelight by paying people to have their game reviewed in various newspapers poorly. And as a result of the public outcry, this made the game spiral into the success we know it as today. So yeah, that is partly why Grand Theft Auto is so popular today. I've covered some pretty funny video game promotions in the past before, such as my video where for Resident Evil they decided to leave a bunch of dead bodies around London for a promotional stunt. What good times were had by all. But today we are talking about Electronic Arts, otherwise known as EA, the company who are almost as bad as... I'm going to come back to you on that one. In 2012, EA was getting ready to release Medal of Honor Warfighter, the latest version of its top-selling video game. I imagine the marketing team had a bunch of money to play around with, ran out of ideas and figured, how do we blow this money? I wonder. And yes, I know this is coming from a Brit and it's probably a little bit more absurd to my ears than perhaps if you're from the States, but it's absurd. The company had a number of marketing partners which were prominently displayed on their website, including the Macmillan Group, the maker of high-powered sniper rifles, and Magpul, which sells high-capacity magazines and other accessories for assault-style weapons. You know, the kind of weapon that any true-blooded American needs, a high-powered assault rifle and sniper rifle that can hit your targets from 2.5 miles away. You know, all part of the right to bear arms, mind you. High-powered caliber arms, something which is completely necessary in today's day and age. Most cross-brand promotions I've seen in things like video games normally comes down to relatively normal products like Mountain Dew or Doritos, for example. So yeah, basically EA made a landing page on their website so anyone can go on and not only have a look at the game, but look at the sponsored links that goes through directly to those websites to go and browse and purchase weapons. You know, for any lead-toting lover in life would find an easy resource to go and find something that they might want to buy. Yes, like I said, this all sounds very strange from someone that wasn't born with a right to hold a rifle in their hand. Yep, I can just imagine in the States you get born and the baby is holding a Glock when it comes out the womb because that's just the way it is. In a way, yes, if you're going to promote a gun with any video game, then Medal of Honor makes the most sense given the nature of the game. But is it necessary or even wise to do? Even though the game was released as a mature title, we all know the vast majority of people playing these games are 12-year-olds jumping on Xbox Live to yell out every single swear word they know to strangers on the internet. So to promote something like this, yeah, it's a bit questionable, don't you think? And yes, I know there is a whole argument to be made about rights and responsibilities of the parents and the kids and the makers of the game, but we are going down a rabbit hole there. The website slowly started to announce even more partners, such as the London Bridge Company, who specialised in tactical nylon gear, the SOG Group, who specialised in knives and tools, and LaRue Tactical, Texan company that sells precision weapons and accessories. The company even ran ads and blog posts outlining some of the sponsors' weapons and equipment on sale, such as silencers, muzzle brakes, and even custom-built tomahawks. Custom-built tomahawks? Okay guys, look, these cross-promotionals are getting a little bit too far for my liking. I'm just going to stick with my Doritos, thanks. So yeah, this was all a thing, but I think the most important and key takeaway from this, from the perspective of why they did the actual promotion, was the fact that many of the guns that were in the game were actual real guns in real life, and many of these partners made those guns. Meaning that if you were playing the game and you liked a particular gun, you could even go to the website of the actual people that make and sell the gun to potentially look at getting one in real life. You know, provided you don't go around and try and get a killing spree like you do in Medal of Honor. Anyway, as you might imagine, there is always going to be a group of people who are genuinely interested in looking at these types of products. There were a whole lot more, however, who kicked up a storm when people found out that this partnership existed. In particular, hyperlinks taking visitors on the EA website directly to websites to buy guns. So, at the time, EA kinda responded to the backlash, and they kept the website up, but quietly removed the links, meaning that if anybody wanted to go and find them, they had to do it at their own volition. EA representative Jeff Brown stated that the publisher took action after learning its site linked to these pages, and even went on record as saying, "We felt it was inappropriate and took the links down." It just goes to show, doesn't it? And yes, you might be looking at this and thinking, these people are being incredibly oversensitive. However, you have to remember the time that this happened, in particular that the Connecticut shootings had just happened, meaning that people were pretty on edge, particularly about having the potential of youths getting hold of weapons. So, you know what, sort of understandable. However, despite removing the links, they did defend their actions by stating that video game developers were like film producers, in which they frequently use the licensing and images of people, franchises, buildings, cars, and military equipment. In order to make the Medal of Honor game as realistic as possible, they were doing the same thing. Developers of the game were even saying that they would try and keep the game as authentic as possible, having access to photos, videos, and sight of actual weapons so the developers know that the weapon systems in their game are as lifelike as possible. The best example I can think of for this is football, or soccer for you Yanks out there. The video games FIFA and Pro Evo. One is better than the other, arguably, given that EA licensed FIFA, which basically owns everything. So yeah. In the face of a rising storm and PR backlash, EA came out and said that the actual people who were being advertised on their landing page weren't paying them to actually do that. This was just part of their partnership. But people weren't happy, so they even took it a step further and said that any profits made from these sales, part of those proceeds would go to support armed service veterans, which, you know, is a pretty cool thing. But was this just an excuse to carry on the promotion? Executive producer of the game commented on what I'm going to leave you with. Basically, where do you draw the line in this? There is, of course, the reality and the fantasy, and where they merge the two. I know that Medal of Honor is based largely on things in real life, but How far do you actually push that to your audience? If the developers wanted to make the game as authentic as possible, more power to them. But again, do you actually push that on your customers once you've managed to get that? I'll let you be the judge of that. And yes, we're talking about Duke Nukem Forever, that game that you thought was never, ever going to come out. To find out how this happened, we need a little bit of a history lesson to get us all up to speed a little bit. In the glamorous year of 1991, Duke Nukem is developed and published for MS-DOS. This game was, well, it was okay, for the time at least. A basic, simple side-scrolling game made by a company called Apogee. Popular enough to then have a sequel, Duke Nukem 2, released in the year 1993, and the first 3D version of the game released in 96, Duke Nukem 3D. This game in particular was particularly popular and certainly, well, was much better than the previous two iterations of the game. I mean, this trailer is just to give you a taste of what Duke Nukem 3D was all about. Yep, this was a game for the ages. Crude, unique, and innovative. 3 words that I never thought I'd be saying together in the same sentence, but that is, I think, the only way that you could describe this game. However, you then didn't have any other game in the franchise for quite some time. Yes, there were a few remakes and whatnot, but no true successor to Duke Nukem 3D. With the developers on the face of it simply saying blow it out of your ass when anyone asks for a sequel and when it was due to be released. However, what many people didn't know is that there were many, many hurdles in the way of preventing the developers from actually making the game they wanted to make. So, it's at this point that we need to introduce you to this man. This is George Broussard. He was a designer and producer for the original 2 Duke Nukem games, and now he was in a leading role. Being appointed the director for a new potential sequel, what could possibly go wrong? Yes, the sequel, Duke Nukem Forever, was announced on the 7th of April 1997, with an initial release date for winter 1998. Highly anticipated, with small snippets of videos and development photos whipping fans into a frenzy, only to then have, well, not really much more to actually promote this title. One of the main reasons for this was that the engine for the game being used at the time was the Quake engine, which was being handed out like hotcakes to video game developers at the time. However, with the imminent release of Quake 2, why on earth would someone on this development team want to use an outdated engine for their game? They wanted Duke Nukem Forever to be the killer video game successor that they always needed off the back of the success of Duke Nukem 3D. Meaning that the game had to be delayed in order for Duke Nukem Forever to take advantage of that sweet, sweet new engine. I mean, on the face of it, that seems pretty reasonable. If you want your product to be the best it can be, why not just wait a little bit longer and get the new engine and then just base your game off that? Seems like a good idea, right? At E3 later that year, video game footage was released for the game which got people excited. However, the engine would soon be changing. No, not from Quake Engine 1 to 2, I mean from 2 to the Unreal Engine. Yes, this was a further engine design change that they wanted to add on top of the first one, meaning that there was an even further delay to the release of the game. You do have to remember, mind you, that this game was due to be released the following winter, so either that they were already well ahead of schedule, or they needed to get some serious crunch time in if they were going to release this game on time. This idea fell back to the premise that Duke Nukem being a franchise and this being a new sequel truly was going to be a game of the ages. If you want a game to succeed, why release a half-baked title on an old engine when you can use the shiny new cutting-edge engine for your new Duke Nukem sequel? Might have made more sense for them to have made their own engine, but no, they didn't do that. Yep, back to square one, folks. Let's wrap this up and take it back to basics. We're basically creating an entirely new game here. Again. The year 1998, the year that the game was originally meant to be released, came and went, and there was no real signs of the game being developed, and nothing released for the public to actually find out how far along this game actually was. However, George Broussard was determined that this game was going to be made, and even said that it was due to be released the year after, in the year 1999. And I think you can pretty much guess what happened there. Promises were made, but nothing was fulfilled. people were starting to get a bit curious as to what the hell was going on. A few new screenshots were released which got people a little bit excited, but aside from that, nothing else was really spoken about. 1999 passed without a hint of a finished product in sight. And yes, of course, there was yet another delay. And I'm going to give you the moment to make a decision onto what you think the reason why this was delayed was. Is it either A, that there was a new engine? Was it B, that there was a new engine? Was it C, that perhaps there was a new engine? Or D, that there was a new engine? So yes, if you picked any of those options, you're right, because there was indeed a new engine, which caused a further delay in development. Oh my god, this game is never getting finished. He noted that the Unreal Engine had a new improved version. Not wanting to be left in the dust, the developers used the new engine again. This being the fourth engine chosen for a game that was already way out of budget and behind schedule. By the year 2000, Duke Nukem Forever was still far from complete. As to the success of Duke Nukem 3D, this meant that 3D Realms didn't require any external funding, and they basically didn't have any deadlines due to external pressures, meaning that they could take their sweet-ass time with making this game. And this is pretty much the running theme here, the fact that they didn't have any external pressures for them to actually finish the game, and that you had a director that was so invested in making this the perfect sequel, nothing was ever going to get completed. And every time that you got to a point where the game was almost finished, there would inevitably be some more technology which you could theoretically use to make your game better, but then you'd have to go back to square one again. You can sort of see where the cycle's going here. And during all this time, money was going down the drain. Whilst 3D Realms probably did quite well off the initial game, Duke Nukem 3D, it's not an infinite money bank here. There's only a finite amount of money and time that the studio could theoretically use before they had no choice but to abandon development. This is at the same time as other games in the genre were gaining their footing and taking the throne from Duke Nukem. The longer this went on for, there would be less and less people that would even care about the Duke Nukem franchise. And yes, please just finish this game. I don't even care if it's not good. Just finish it and put us all out of our misery. Please. In December 2000, the rights to publish Duke Nukem Forever were purchased by Take-Two Interactive, with hopes that it would be released in the following year. But they did not account for the tenacity and determination of the director, George Broussard. Problems they would soon run into was pretty much the very insular development cycle around 3D Realms, not hiring enough staff to make the game actually progress quickly enough for it to be released in a timely manner. By 2003, only 18 people were reportedly working on Duke Nukem Forever, so you'd think that there'd be many questions raised how a game could have taken 6 years at this point with no end date in sight. This was confirmed in an interview where Broussard told a journalist that his team had fucked up and were restarting development. This ultimately led to more walkouts and frustration over the following years, leading to a strange period of indefinite development. Yeah, at this point people just kinda had enough. They were pretty much sick of working on the same game for 6 years straight, with no end in sight. However, there were also some other reasons why the studio was struggling to get staff on board to actually make this damn game, and that was the way that they'd agreed their contracts for the funding and salary in their own jobs. This joke from an outsider's perspective is funny, but the staff who were working on the title were doing this as their day job day to day. Developers working on the same game for years, being paid a low amount compared to the industry standard, and were being promised profit-sharing agreements once the game was released. And that's the kicker, once the game was released. I wonder how many people even stuck it out for that long, where the game was actually finished. It was by the year 2007 when the pennies started to drop, and perhaps they realised that they were going to start running into some troubles if they didn't get this game off the ground and released, because they realised that the coffers were running particularly low at this point. So they basically hired a whole bunch of new staff and started an aggressive recruitment campaign to try and get a team that could actually get this thing finished. As a result of this, the game had a new trailer released, which was the first trailer released for the game since the year 2001. This was insane, and I think at this point, most people had even forgotten that this game was even in development. I think at this point most people had just moved on and didn't really care about it anymore. But it was still there trying to crawl out of its pit for some relevancy in this strange new world. In 2009, they realised that they needed capital, and the true relationship between 3D Realms and Take-Two was really beginning to show. Fractured. So much so that they tried to ask for $6 million to complete the project. This was for numerous reasons, including the fact that the game had taken 11 years at this point to make, all of which was down to pretty much the fault of one man. This was rebuffed after a lowball offer was given, and after not being accepted, Bouchard said that the development would immediately stop unless he got his $6 million. So, he didn't get his $6 million, and development stopped. As you might imagine, this game of corporate chicken went on for some time. Who would be the first to blink? I mean, at the end of the day, you've only got so much money left to play with, your options are pretty limited at this point. So, what happened? Well, we don't really know. Nothing kinda happened. It all went quiet after some legal wranglings, and this ceased in September 2010 when Gearbox Software announced that it had just bought the intellectual property rights from 3D Realms and would continue the development of this troubled game. My word, please just let this be over with. On the 24th of May 2011, Gearbox announced that Duke Nukem Forever had gone gold after 15 years. 15 whole years for a game. Holy shit. Yeah, I mean, you can't really blame anyone for saying that. This game had been created and then knocked down and rebuilt more times than you can probably count on a single hand, and now it's finally released for the public to see. So, what did people think about the game that took 15 years to develop? The game was criticised for having tedious level design, outdated and crude humour, poor controls, and long loading times. All of that after 15 years of development. As a matter of fact, just to highlight how long this is, the game actually has the world record for the longest game ever in development. So, there you go. And this is R.O.B, otherwise known as Nintendo's robotic operating buddy. This robot was a toy accessory for the NES system, which to most who have never seen this thing before, probably scratching their heads and wondering why Nintendo made a robot. As a matter of fact, for most people watching, if you weren't born in the 80s, you probably recognise R.O.B as the playable character in the popular gaming franchise Super Smash Bros., which, for some strange reason, he unnervingly manages to get to the very top of the tier lists every single time. How is he that good of a fighter? Look, if you go online and watch a video about R.O.B, 9 times out of 10 the creator is probably going to take the piss out of him. But I'm here to defend R.O.B, and I think that this little guy actually saved the bacon of the video game industry. And as strange of a decision this seems on the surface, actually is quite a stroke of brilliance. Let me take you back to 1983. Something happened to the video game industry in this year, particularly in the United States, when the market was flooded with a barrage of rubbish games, poor quality products, and quickly produced titles thrown out to just sweep up some quick sales. This led to the video game crash of 1983. Numerous video game developers and companies filed for bankruptcy during this time, with sentiments for home consoles waning, bringing into question if there would even be a future for video games at all, with consoles such as the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, and the Game & Watch. With the industry in such dire straits at this time, it needed someone bold, someone forward-thinking, and someone with the ingenuity to think of something truly innovative to really do something that no one else has ever done. And that includes deciding to make a robot. Yes, during the time of the video game crash, where there's a general lack of appetite for video games, nobody wants to spend $30 to $40 in a shop for another ET game. Therefore, most stores simply decided to not opt to have video games in their stores in the first place. Effectively, the entire medium was painted with a single brush. Nintendo had just released the Famicom in Japan of the same year, with a view of releasing it in the other parts of the world, including North America, in the coming years. Off the back of this crash, they decided to rebrand the Famicom to the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the infamous NES. This console is pretty much a poster child for anybody that decides to base their entire personality on one video game console, and if you're going to pick one, it's probably the NES. This is as iconic as it gets. So, as part of this rebranding, they decided to change the Famicom, which looked like this, to the NES, which then looked like this. But that wasn't really the stroke of brilliance here. The extra additional choice they made was to include a piece of kit, which, like I said, came in a robotic form. Yes, Nintendo made these changes so that the NES was not just another gaming console, but they wanted it to stand out as a new platform meant to revolutionize home entertainment and how users experience a console more as a toy than they would as a gaming console. Yeah, I mean, you could have this grey box that plays video games, but if you get one, you also get this awesome ass robot. His name is Rob, and look how cute he is. Yes, get this and you can get Rob too. And not gonna lie, if I was a kid back then I would be all over that. Who doesn't want a robot in their house? That was the trick here. You might not necessarily want the console itself alone, but with something awesome to tag with it, that gives people the reason to get both in one go. The robot doesn't work without the NES, so if you want the robots, you gotta get them both. Meaning that this was a great way to get the consoles into people's homes. Sort of like a Trojan horse, or something like that. The release of the NES came with 2 games that were compatible with R.O.B, or should I say, 2 officially licensed video games from Nintendo which weren't included in the pile of landfill games the market had seen previously. These would be Nintendo's robot series, Gyromite and Stack Up. Gyromite is a platformer where you control the main character, running around and collecting dynamite. But the cool part, or the gimmick some might call it, is that the game can be played with R.O.B on the second controller with you. R.O.B functions to pick up spinning gyros on either side of him, which are dropped on large coloured button levers, coloured red and green, which correspond with the obstacles found in the game. So, you press start, the game flashes different colours, which communicates with R.O.B's sensors in his eyes, and as he watches the screen, determines what he needs to press in order to allow you to proceed. So, R.O.B watches the screen, he presses the button, and then Rob's your uncle. Yes, you could either wait for your robot companion a whole 20 seconds to decide what he's doing before he presses the button, or you could lean over and press the button yourself, but either way, it was a brand new way to play these games. The other game, known as Stack Up, pretty much speaks for itself. R.O.B has to stack things in front of him. It's all part of the game, people. Truly exhilarating gameplay. Look, you're not going to see R.O.B playing Contra, Bomberman or Double Dragon. He can play only these 2 games, which might make you wonder why on earth people got this robot in the first place. I mean, yeah, the game sucked, but that was not the point of R.O.B for Nintendo anyway. They wanted a reason to get the consoles into people's homes, and this stroke of pure brilliance of getting the console and the wide array of titles it had, including the industry standard of licensing third-party video game developers to produce and distribute games for the console, making the games actually decent and making the NES truly the next level in gaming. So yeah, people would buy the NES mainly for R.O.B in 1985. And then after that, realising that the gimmick of having R.O.B quickly wore off, people would then probably look at the console and realise that it is actually a lot more than you first thought. There is a lot of good games in this thing, and really, I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's the NES, people. That is all people needed. They needed a reason to get the console, and once they had it, this was the ticket back into the gaming world. They truly realised the potential of what this console could do, and the fact that there are actually decent video games out there, not just the shovels of shite that was released in the years prior. While R.O.B alone was probably not the device that lasted long, given the fact that he was discontinued just a few years later after release, this did the job, and getting the NES into people's homes became one of the best-selling consoles of all time, revitalising the video game industry and being truly iconic at the same time. All thanks, in a small part at least, to R.O.B, the robot. Yes, we're talking about Doom, the video game today, and every time I talk about this, I always just think of the incredible soundtrack that comes with this game. Just makes me want to fight demons. And no, I'm not talking about the MIDI version of Metallica's Master of Puppets, I mean that epic Doom soundtrack you heard in the most recent iteration of the 2016 Doom game. What a fantastic soundtrack that is. Doom is a video game franchise created by John Carmack, John Romero, Adrian Carmack, Kevin Cloud, and Tom Hall. A classic first-person shooter where an unnamed space marine called Doom Guy walks around and shoots a horde of demons and undead for the sake of shooting hordes of demons and undead. This game is not just your average shooter, however, as it was absolutely groundbreaking at the time. Not only is it an absolute pillar in first-person shooters, but it is also the first game of the first-person shooter genre that really delved into the 3D aspect, that gave us the first taste of what a 3D first-person shooter could actually be like. And let me tell you, it looked pretty damn good at the time. For those of you that don't know, the effects were layered, making relatively 2D objects pop off the screen and to give the player a truly immersive 360-degree shooting action game. This was so special in fact at the time that in the 30 years since its initial release in 1993, I can't think of a game which has stood the test of time quite like the Doom franchise, and seemingly has a community that is strong to this very day. This game has become a whole franchise in itself, and is, in the gaming community at least, very highly regarded. And for something else that has also managed to come into all our lives in a glorious way, Windows, of course. Not sponsored, but Windows with an operating system which I think most people around the world have had some connection with, being the baseline for many different systems that people use to this very day. However, what we're talking about today is effectively going back in time to the year 1995, a time where the Windows operating system was only getting its legs and battling its way to the mainstream popularity. Not everyone had a Windows PC, hell, even a PC at all at this time. Who else would have thought that instead of that stellar operating system, the Paint program, or anything else that the operating system can provide, it wasn't really any of these things that really brought Microsoft into the limelight. I think for a lot of people, it came down to the game Doom. And really, with both of these things coming together, it really made Windows a viable gaming platform for the first time ever. Some of you may recognise a certain man called Gabe Newell, most recognised for his possible Half-Life 3 releases, but maybe, probably not. He actually used to be the producer of the first 3 releases of the Windows system for Microsoft. So why do I bring this up? Well, Gabe himself has even gone on record to say that he believes that at a certain point in time, Doom was installed on more PCs than the Windows operating system was. And, I mean, you think about that today and you just don't possibly understand how that could be. I mean, Windows is so integrated and everybody pretty much has it, apart from Mac and Linux users, but mainly everybody else has some form of Microsoft device with a Microsoft operating system. This should just put into perspective how popular of a game this was at the time, and why it is probably one of the most popular video games of all time, arguably. So, around this time there was Windows 95, but most users of a personal computer were using the MS-DOS as their computer operating system. A system which worked perfectly fine. I mean, if Doom was created just for Windows 95 onwards, sure, it would have probably ran better. But MS-DOS was compatible, and with most people not needing to swap to Windows 95, most people decided to stick with their MS-DOS operating system which they'd already had for a number of years before. And with the release of Doom, they were still able to play this new game. This was a time when the game was just released, and due to it being completely revolutionary, everybody wanted a piece of the action. This was fine if you were a whiz with DOS command lines and syntax to work the damn thing itself, but it would never be a fully fledged market changer if the average Joe could not access the games. Therefore, they needed a user-friendly way to get people to be playing these games, especially if you're someone who may even be learning to use a computer for the first time. Gabe Newell was disappointed that this game ran in MS-DOS rather than Windows, and thus tasked some of his engineers to create a Windows port for the game. So, these engineers were tasked with that very task, making the port for the Windows operating system, hence the release of Doom 95. And this was the moment where Windows could truly proclaim to the world, we are a serious competitor in this field, and we have the operating system to run your games as smoothly as a Windows 95 machine should. And yes, I know that sounds incredibly strange to say now, but again, I have to remind you, this is the year 1995. Stuff was very different back then. Truly, this was the start of a new era in gaming. Best of all, the port itself was completely free, with Gabe even commenting on the fact that it was critical that games were used in driving consumer purchasing behaviour, and the figures clearly don't lie. He knew there was a market for this sort of thing, and that was even before Valve, Half-Life, or anything of the sort. Microsoft wanted to take this a step further, and they wanted to show the world that Microsoft on a PC was the future for gaming, and therefore they created that infamous video. So if you've already seen this, you'll probably know what I'm about to show you, but for those of you that don't, I want you to sit back and go back to some classic 90s nostalgia.
These games are getting really realistic. Next year I might even play in the big Doom tournament.
Yep, that's Bill Gates himself there, wielding a shotgun, so take that as you will. But this was what they needed to try and push the idea that this was a serious machine at the time, and for everybody that wanted to get on board this new Doom game, then, well, Windows was the way to do it. And clearly they knew that if they were able to get on board an audience that already loved the Doom franchise, to then start using Windows, that's how you build an audience. Which is particularly strange because you'd think that people would have the machines and the operating systems to run the games they want to play, but in this case it was kind of the other way round. They already had an audience for the game, but then built the operating system to play games and then try to get those gamers to come and join their operating system. Look, that was probably not the best explanation, but hopefully this all makes sense in some weird way. So yeah, that was that one strange time in history where more people had Doom on their machines than the Windows 95 operating system itself. And that just goes to show how important Windows and the game Doom have been for gaming all the way up until today. If you liked the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to be notified as soon as I upload my next video, be sure to hit the bell button. And if you've got any ideas for what topics you'd like me to discuss next, let me know down in the comments below. As always, sources used in the video will be in the description. This is one of those stories which if you heard it, you probably wouldn't believe it, but I guess you had to be there at the time to kind of understand and appreciate how big of a game Doom must have been. Hell, I imagine a lot of people watching this probably weren't even alive at the time. But for those of us that have played Doom, particularly the first Doom game, I think you can really appreciate how groundbreaking it was, and at the end of the day, that this whole story is a little bit more believable. Especially if this comes from Gabe Newell himself. Now that I've sung your praises, my god, release Half-Life 3. Please. 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 Oh, well, I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.